Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this event as part of the 2021 Sunday Times Cheltenham Literature Festival. My name is Daniel Hahn, and I'm delighted to have been joined by Anna Woltz and David Colmer to talk about a couple of books, one of which has just come out and another of which is still being made even as we speak, which you're going to hear us talk about over the next half hour or so. Anna is the author of 24 books. She's been published in, I think it is 19 languages. We're going to talk a bit about what that means to be published in lots of different languages. And she's won countless prizes for her work, including for this book, Talking to Alaska, which we're going to be talking about today. David Colmer is a really wonderful translator of books from Dutch to English. He has also won many prizes internationally over the course of his career. And we're going to be talking to him about what being a translator means, what is involved in being a translator. The book that he is translating at the moment is a book that Anna has written. So we're going to talk about that kind of collaboration between a writer and a translator and what that actually involves. We're going to start, though, with Talking to Alaska, and I'm not going to say very much about it, except that when I interview writers at festivals and things like this, what I normally do is I read the book beforehand, of course, and while I'm reading, I scribble little things, because they're my own books, I'm allowed to scribble in the margins. I scribble little things in the margins for things that I want to ask questions about or things that I think are important or whatever. And all I will say about Talking to Alaska is it's one of those books where I kept forgetting to make notes. I knew that I was supposed to be making notes of questions I wanted to ask Anna about it, but I found myself going, oh no, I've read another 30 pages and I've completely forgotten to make notes because I was so excited about these characters and about the story and what was going to happen. So I'm slightly annoyed with Anna for that reason. But it is a really wonderful book, and I'm delighted to have Anna here to talk about it and David to talk about his work as well. I'm going to start, Anna, just by asking a kind of introductory question about Talking to Alaska, which is there are two principal characters. There are two human characters. There is also a dog who is also a main character, but there are two principal young characters called Parker and Sven. And I wonder if you could just, as an introduction, just tell us, I suppose, about the situations we find them in at the beginning of the book. Where do we meet them in their lives as the book begins?
We meet the characters when they first meet in class. It's the new school year, and they haven't been in this class before, so they start and straight away they hate each other, really. And they both have a secret. Sven is 13 and he suffers from epilepsy, and he knows that at some point his new classmates will find out he suffers from epilepsy, but he doesn't want them to see him as the boy with epilepsy. He's Sven, he's himself. So he's trying to figure out how to be something else than the boy with the disability. And Parker is a 12-year-old girl, and she just had the worst summer of her life. And something happened to her parents. I'm not going to tell what, but she's afraid of the outside world. And she suddenly realizes that any moment, everything just can go wrong. And it does go wrong. That very first hour of the very first day at school, it goes really wrong because Sven makes fun of her and he comes up with this really cruel nickname. And then they're bound by this dog, Alaska. And Alaska used to be Parker's dog. Her little brother was allergic to dogs, so Alaska had to go. And Parker doesn't know where Alaska ended up. And then that very first day at school, she discovers that her beloved dog now belongs to Sven, the horrid boy from her new class. Alaska is now his assistant's dog.
And so if she didn't hate him already, that's a good enough reason to.
Yeah.
What's really interesting, though, Anna, is we have these two characters. You said, we meet them at the beginning. They really hate each other. That first day of school is so terrible for both of them. But there are lots of things they have in common to do with feeling different, not wanting people to know certain things about them. There are quite a lot of ways in which, they wouldn't like me saying this, but there are quite a lot of ways in which they are a bit similar, aren't there? They're both angry with their situation in the world.
Yeah, and they're both quite quite afraid. They're scared of what will happen next, whether it's an epileptic seizure or whether it's guys with guns coming in. I mean, they both feel unsure of the whole world, really. And then they're both teens starting to have all these new puberty feelings, and they feel like outsiders, and that's what actually binds them.
Can I ask you, Anna, just to read just like the first page of the book? I think it'd be really nice for people to get a sense, because we meet one of the characters. But I'm going to ask you if you could also read just a little bit in Dutch, which is the language in which you wrote the book. Yes. I'm assuming that most of you watching this don't understand Dutch. I also don't understand Dutch, and I'm really curious to know just what it sounds like. Just see if you could read just like a couple of lines in the Dutch, just so we can hear it a little bit, and then read us a bit from the English translation.
Yes. So the book is told by Sven and Parker together. So it's one chapter by Sven and one chapter Parker, one Sven, one Parker. And I mean, this was so much fun writing, because you get to see those two perspectives. And especially at first when they hate each other, it was so much fun describing how they look at each other. So this is the Dutch copy, which looks very, very different from the English one. And actually, when I visit schools in the Netherlands now, and I show both books, they all love the English cover, and they like it better than the Dutch one.
Interesting.
Yeah, which is, well, I think I like it better as well. It's just, I love the English cover. Okay, so a couple of sentences from the Dutch book. Dit is het plan voor vandaag. In de eerste 5 uur iets zo briljants doen dat de hele school meteen weet wie ik ben. Ze moeten me kennen voordat ze over me horen. So that was Dutch. That's my own language. And now in English. Did you understand anything?
I didn't understand anything, but actually I think there are a few words, because there are Dutch and English are not completely unconnected. And there are a few words, because I have the English in front of me, so I was cheating a little bit, so I knew what it meant. But I can kind of recognize a few, even like that first phrase, because the first phrase in English is, this is the plan for today. Yeah. And it sounds a little bit similar. Read it to us in English.
Yeah, I will just read the first page. That's the first piece Sven is telling you. So this is the plan for today. To pull off such a brilliant stunt within the first 5 hours that the whole school instantly finds out who I am. They need to know me before they hear about me. I have no idea how I'm going to do it. I don't want to get thrown out of school on day 1, of course, but it's got to be big. If I don't act soon, then within a week, I'll be that loser from 1B. The kid who gets brought to school every day by his dad and picked up by his mum, who's never allowed to be alone. The guy with the watch that beeps every couple of hours because it's time for some more pills. I'm not going to let that happen.
Brilliant, thank you. So that's the beginning of the book in English, in a brilliant translation by Laura Watkinson.
Yes.
David, before Anna and I continue talking about this book, I wonder, David, if I can ask you a sort of general thing about translation, because we've just heard a little bit of the book in Dutch, a little bit of the book in English, translated by Laura Watkinson. And I wonder if you can just say briefly, I guess, what is it that a translator does? Because it feels like, that Dutch thing and the English thing are sort of the same, but also they're completely different. So how do you kind of explain what translation is to people who haven't encountered this or haven't thought about it before?
Well, it's not just transferring the meaning of the words, or especially not the meaning of the words in the order in which they've been put down in the original language, but it's a bit like telling a joke. I mean, you can hear a joke, and then if you want to tell it to someone else, you have to make it come to life in the way you tell it. So a translator reads the original and sees the meaning of it, but has to do exactly the same things as the author did to make it exciting, to give it tension, to make it funny in appropriate places, and put all those kind of things into their translation. So you're you're trying to copy all the clever things, the emotional things that the author's done, and at the same time transfer the meaning of the words.
So it sounds like, so when Anna was reading it, obviously it sounded like, you know, you're hearing this kid called Sven talking. It sounded like a natural, like a normal voice. And I suppose that's also the kind of thing you're doing, right? You don't want people to read the translation thinking about how it sounds a little bit still like it's in Dutch or whatever. You want it to feel like it's a kind of completely new, fresh people talking to you.
Yeah, generally, of course, sometimes stories have voices that are a little bit stilted because they're someone who doesn't speak the language that well, and then you have to do that too. So you have to do everything that the author does, really, and then in your own language.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to you, David, when we're going to talk about the specific book you're working on of Anna's. But Anna, one of the things that, when we were talking about the kind of introducing these characters and their situation, having reread the book just a couple of days ago, and so I now have in my mind, I kind of am with other characters where they are at the end of the book, because I've got to the end of the story, which we're not going to talk about, the spoilers. But it made me think about how much you make them change in these couple of hundred pages, how much they develop in their relationship with themselves, in their confidence about the whole world and that kind of thing. And I wonder if you can say something about Alaska the dog in relation to that, because Alaska, you mentioned, as a dog, used to be Parker's, now belongs to Sven, and it feels like Alaska is one of the reasons their lives kind of change. And I don't know whether this is, Alaska of course is a very special dog, but also maybe it's something about how we are with animals anyway, and how, you know, unconditional affection we get from animals and how we love animals. Maybe it's not just about Alaska being special. Maybe there is something about what animals can bring to our lives.
I think so, yeah. I mean, I love dogs, and I've written more books about dogs. And then at some point I thought, I can't keep writing about just another dog. And then I was in a library, and this kid told me he owns an assistance dog. And I had actually never heard about a kid owning an assistance dog, because usually dogs are family dogs, of course. I mean, a kid can own a rabbit or a goldfish, but a dog is always the family dog, and everyone is allowed to pet the dog and feed the dog and walk the dog. But with assistance dogs, it's very different. When an assistance dog is working, only the special owner of the dog is allowed to talk to the dog or pet it. And I thought it's just so special. A dog, and a dog is really an amazing animal to me. A dog belonging to just one kid, to have your very own dog. And then it's also about losing a dog, of course, because Parker loses Alaska. But in the end, Sven and Parker really find each other in their love for Alaska. And in the end, they both want what's best for Alaska. I mean, there's this horrible, painful scene where they try and let Alaska choose between them.
I knew you were going to say that. It's unbearable, that moment.
It was unbearable to write.
It's such a cruel thing to do as a writer. I don't know how you forgive yourself for making them do this in this book.
I don't know. I mean, I never feel that cruel doing all these things to my human characters. And I always think, yeah, that's what they're in for. They're in my book. Of course, they're going to have all these adventures. But doing this to a dog and doing it to Alaska, and she just had to choose between her two favorite people. It was heartbreaking.
Well, so for people who haven't read the book, basically these young people are in a field with Alaska, and they say, we will each walk away. We're going to, and we don't. Neither of us is allowed to call her. We will just each walk away and see who she follows. Who does she love more? Who does she feel like she has to look after? Whatever.
Yeah, the dog has to choose. Yeah.
It's a terrible, terrible thing you've done, Anna Woltz. I wonder whether David, I mean, this is a slightly irrelevant question, but I think when you're translating a book, whether you find things and you think, I wish I could change this. Because I work as a translator as well, and every once in a while I think, I wish the author hadn't done this. It's making me very unhappy. I wish maybe no one will find out if I just change this a little bit and just I'm just going to be a little bit nicer to the characters. Are you tempted sometimes when you're tell the truth now?
Yeah, maybe a little bit, and if it's just like a teensy weensy little change, then maybe I'll kind of think about doing it even. But then I would talk to the author maybe.
You're so well behaved. You're so much nicer than I am.
And David can't get away with it because I think most Dutch authors are able to read English. My books are also being translated into Japanese and Russian and Swedish, and I have no idea how much has changed. No, I mean, I'm quite sure the story won't be changed in Japanese or Russian, but then it would be a possibility.
Well, because your English is very good. If the English edition of Talking to Alaska said once there was a boy called Sven, a girl called Parker, and they immediately became best friends on the first day of school, and they shared a wonderful dog and lived happily ever after, you would notice really quickly, presumably.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that's slightly annoying. Can I just ask you, David, a bit about the process of translating a book? The one you're working on at the moment, the title, am I right, is My Especially Weird Week with Tess? That's Anna's book that you're working on now?
Right, yeah. That's the working title. Hasn't been confirmed yet. But
So the title still may change a bit.
Well, the publisher has to green light the title, so we have to see what they decide, and there may be some discussions about it yet.
Ah, okay. So just kind of a very quick, just about like the mechanics of how the job works. Does the publisher approach you and say, there is this book, do you want to translate it? How does that happen? How do you get asked to translate a book like this? I mean, typically.
That's generally the way it happens, and sometimes I might have some history with the book or the author. So if I've worked with them before, or with the Dutch publisher, but generally it comes from the English language publisher. So
right. And the one you're doing now, the one which may be called My Especially Weird Week with Tess, which is a great title actually. If you do go with that, I hope you'll go with that.
I think so too.
It's not going to be published for a little while, and actually you're working on it at the moment. Where are you in the process of making the translation at the moment?
Well, I've almost finished the draft that I'm going to share with Anna, and then we're going to talk about it. We've already talked about it a little bit first, just to establish some kind of ground rules and see how it's going to work. But I've almost finished the book. Next week I should be able to send it to Anna, and then the week after that we're going to meet up in real life, if that's possible. And discuss it. That'll probably take us most of a day, maybe 3 or 4 hours or something. And then I'll take that discussion and I'll make the version I'm going to send to the publisher, which will then there'll be further discussions with the editors about maybe some things that aren't clear or could be improved a little bit.
Right.
And before I even started working on it, I already talked to Anna about some issues that were in the book, some things that were a bit problematic for the translation and how we could resolve them. So we already had some discussions before I even started.
And so Anna, your role in this, it's not like, you write the book in Dutch and then you send it off and then you completely are unconnected forever. You don't have to worry about it ever again. You get involved with the translation. You will read David's work and you talk about it and you kind of share your opinion. You're quite involved then.
I am. I love being involved in this. I love English. I mean, I would never be able to write a book in English, but I think I can have some sort of sensible remarks about the translation. I mean, just with my books, the books that are translated in English, I'm this involved. I mean, I'm very good friends with my German translator, but we mostly talk about my son, not about my books. And with the other translators, they might send me an email with 3 short questions, but that's it. I don't read those translations because I'm just not able to read those languages. So it's only with the English translations that I'm getting this involved. And I just love thinking about language, and I love thinking about all these. It's like solving sort of a riddle, because David and I both know what I want to say. And then it's this question, how do you say it in English and not make it feel weird, or sometimes I really on purpose write a sentence, for example, in a dialogue with a kid talking, a 10-year-old, and on purpose I make it slightly weird. My Dutch is slightly weird. And then David will have to translate it into slightly weird English. Yeah. And it's so much fun talking about things like that.
There's also, I'm going to ask you, David, I'm going to come back to that topic in a moment, but can I ask you if you have just a little bit of the new book that you might read to us, even if it's just like a paragraph? Because I think, given that no one has heard this before, I think even the publishers have never seen this before. Would you let us hear just a tiny little bit of this new book?
Yeah, sure. The book is likely to be called My Especially Weird Week with Tess. And the me in the title is the boy, a 10-year-old boy who tells the story. His name's Samuel. And I've chosen this paragraph where he meets Tess. And this is it. At the back of the doctor's, there was a small patio. And in the middle of that patio, there was a table with a laptop, a pot plant, and a desk lamp on it. The cord from the lamp snaked over the grey pavers for a bit, but didn't go anywhere. It wasn't plugged into anything. Sitting at the table was a sandy-haired girl with a serious face. I looked away, but she'd already seen me. "Wait," she called. I half turned towards her. "Do you know anything about zebrafish?" Her voice was as serious as her face. "Not really," I said. "Do you play the trumpet then?" I shook my head. "Have you ever done a woodworking course?" I shook my head again, and she sighed. "Then I don't need you. Off you go."
Amazing. So hopefully that's going to come out in 2022, sometime next year, I hope. One of the things that I was wondering about, particularly when Anna was talking about having to get like just the right ways of explaining things in the book that may be slightly different, I was wondering how much it's not just about understanding the words. It's not like, you have to learn loads of Dutch words and then you can translate. You also sort of have to know the culture in which the characters are living and the sort of habits and things. There was one moment in the book where it's to do with people eating rusks with aniseed or something. Can you explain just briefly what that means in the original book? What's happening there?
That's the thing that I mentioned before about discussing something with Anna first. And there's a Dutch custom of when a child's born, a baby's born, that you celebrate by eating a special kind of dried biscuit, a round rusk, or zwieback, I guess you would also call it. And then you put on crushed aniseed sweets. And they also do it in this kind of gender reveal color. So you pink aniseed sweets on the rusk for baby girls and blue ones for baby boys. So
when you're translating, I mean, the fact that you know that is fine, but I, as a reader in England, would have no idea what these rusks mean to anyone. So when you're translating, how do you explain that to those of us who are reading the book in a completely different world?
Well, the thing is, in this book, it's not just something that happens in the story; it's a plot feature. So Anna's taken this thing and she's got the characters to run with it. So it happens through several chapters, even, I think. And all kinds of things happen around it, because for Dutch children, they identify this custom immediately. It has a lot of humor and emotional content for them. But even if you explained what it meant for the English reader, it would become very complicated and very dry and technical. So I was wondering what to do with that. And then I happened to speak to Anna's German translator, Andrea Klautmann, and she told me that she'd changed the rusks into balloons. No, that's quite a magic trick, but it actually works. So instead of having these rusks, you have like celebratory balloons in a decorated room. It's quite complicated, but that leads you to do lots of kind of the similar things in English that Anna's done in Dutch. And so I talked to Anna about it. She thought that solution worked really well in German. So that for the English translation, I triangulated English, Dutch, and German.
Yes.
Looking at Andrea's translation, looking at Anna's original, and then thinking about how I can combine them to make that work really well in English. So
it's not. I mean, I think we think about translation as the words in one language and the words in the other language, and you just have to kind of transfer them. But really, you're trying to think about what the readers will know and what they can imagine and what their lives are like a bit as well. I mean, I wonder, Anna, that when we talk about translation, we're sort of assuming. And I said you're published in, I think, 19 languages. We're assuming
23
that actually,
by now.
23.
Yes.
In the last half hour, has it increased since we started talking? That's really impressive. 24, 25. So you're published in 23 languages, even better. But what that means is that there must be something that's possible for a reader who's completely different from your readers in the Netherlands to relate to in the book. That a lot of your readers will not be in Dutch schools, they will not be Dutch speakers, they may not be the same age as these characters. But I suppose when we think about how books travel between writers and translators and readers all over the world, I mean, I read Talking to Alaska, I'm 47 years old, and therefore in a very different life arrangement from the characters. But I guess because everyone sometimes feels different, sometimes feels afraid, sometimes wants to fit in, sometimes has a secret. It means that with a really great story, there is this possibility of finding readers in really different places.
Yeah, thinking about that makes me really happy, actually. I mean, I'm very glad, of course, that my books are being translated in so many languages, but just realizing that somehow I'm describing universal feelings. And apparently kids in Japan recognize the feelings of, falling in love, friendship, having a fight with your parents, all these human experiences. And that's just amazing, really.
Yeah. Presumably there are some things that you have to, things that are not necessarily cultural, but there are some things that you have to learn about, to write about. I mean, we mentioned that there is a character who's a person with epilepsy. There is a character who has had quite a lot of trauma in a recent experience. And I suppose that when you're writing, even if you haven't experienced these things, or even if you don't know anyone, you have to get them right, don't you? You have to, do the research or talk to people and get them right so that people can kind of recognize this.
Definitely. I always do a lot of research, and especially for Talking to Alaska. I talk to so many people who suffer from epilepsy themselves. I went to this dog training school, a training school for assistance dogs. And when I finished the book, before it was published, this 17-year-old girl who suffered from epilepsy herself read the whole manuscript, and I asked her, does this feel right? I know it didn't happen to you exactly like this, but could it have happened? And I think especially writing about something like, epilepsy really exists and is a huge influence on people's lives. And I think it's really important to get that right. So I take a lot of time researching.
That's very good to know. And I think it's one of those things that matters an enormous amount for everyone who is reading the book, even if it doesn't feel like, because I sort of hoped you'd done research, but it doesn't feel like there aren't pages and pages of explaining research in it. But it's a way of feeling like these characters are real in as you've written them, in the voices and the translation and so on. We're going to have to wrap up here, I'm afraid. I am very grateful to Anna Woltz and David Colmer for talking to us. Talking to Alaska is out. I strongly encourage you to find a copy in your school library or your local library or a bookshop or any way you can find one. And sometime next year, a book which might be called My Especially Weird Week with Tess, translated by David Colmer and written by Anna, is going to be coming out. So that's something to look forward to. In the meantime, Talking to Alaska by Anna and translated by Laura Watkinson is out now. Thank you, David. Thank you, Anna. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you.